Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we have got something super helpful for anyone thinking about buying a home in the Greater Toronto area. We're sitting down with Nabil Makwi, a real estate lawyer who's here to answer all your burning questions about the buying process. Whether you're a first-time home buyer or just looking for some expert advice, this conversation is packed with tips and insights you won't want to miss. Let's dive in.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a long time coming.
It's been almost like a couple of years now, like me talking about this. And finally it happened.
Yeah, finally I was able to settle down. And
Excellent. Yeah, that's good. So let's go with the questions we have. I have some questions which the buyers had sent. So I have a question. Can buyers back out if they find issues during the final walkthrough?
Okay, yes, this is a very pertinent question and actually a question that I get asked quite often. So it comes down to what is the issue that the buyer is concerned about. So as there can be minor issues, there can be somewhat major issues, and then issues that actually go to the terms of the agreement of purchase and sale. So that's how I tell my buyers to kind of look at the issue. Now, if it is a minor issue, my advice to buyers is that you won't be able to just get out of this deal because of this minor issue. So my advice to them is to close the transaction, and then we can take steps to try to rectify that issue after closing, including and involving potentially taking action against the seller. Now, if it is a major issue and something that is a term in the agreement of purchase and sale, and the seller has not provided that, then that is an issue that we can demand that the seller rectify prior to closing, and maybe in a situation where we don't have to close, but it would have to be an essential term of that area.
And sometimes it happens like if the cost is significant, it makes sense. But if it's like minor issues, then what would you?
Exactly. It does come down to a cost issue. Sometimes clients may think it's a major issue, but when I actually get on the phone and have that talk with them and I say, okay, what's the issue? Well, such and such is missing. Okay, well, how much is the worst case scenario that is? Like maybe $500. Or even perhaps the property is not left in a clean and broom-swept position, which is in the agreement as well.
Right.
So now, because the issue is a $500 issue, we don't have the ability to not close on the transaction, because then we would be in breach of that agreement of purchase and sale. So in actuality, the buyer would be putting them in a worse position by doing that. So yes, now again, even if it is a major cost item, let's say a $10,000 damage in the property, still in that situation, my advice to clients is that we close the transaction under protest, advising the seller's lawyer that, look, we're closing, but this is a huge issue that needs to be fixed by you. Otherwise, we will take appropriate actions. So that's something that might come up in a walkthrough.
Right.
That we would have to deal with right away.
And it happens all the time, right? Like if the sellers are not that particular about keeping the home in a updated condition, especially when they're moving out, something breaks and you have all those calls coming in.
That's right.
Buyers panicking, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
The main thing to remember is that we are still obligated to close our terms of the agreement, and that's to close.
Yeah.
And then we can take the appropriate steps to get the client
after the closing
in a better position.
Yeah, makes sense. So I have another question from a buyer, which is, what are the consequences if a seller doesn't move out on closing day?
Yes. So this is, again, another very important question, and something that was becoming very common in the recent marketplace, especially in the context of tenants not moving out. So actual sellers not moving out is very rare, and we can talk about that. But what's actually happening, and it's more practical, is that a seller may sell their property, but the tenants have not agreed to move out. Or they may have agreed verbally, and now closing day has come and they're saying, you know what, I don't want to move out. And we've had situations like this where tenants have taken 3 months, 6 months, sometimes 1 year to vacate a property that the seller has sold. So you can imagine how frustrating that was for our seller client, having to carry a mortgage for 1 year, not collect any rent from this tenant for 1 year, and then also be in breach of an agreement of purchase and sale. So the way that we handle this issue is that, first of all, it's very clear right at the beginning at the real estate agent level to make it clear that if there are tenants, have they been served with the proper notices? Have they agreed to vacate the property in writing? And so on and so forth. So a lot of the times you'll find that these steps have not been taken and left to be done later on by perhaps someone else or the lawyer. So in that situation now, again, if these notices hadn't been served, now closing date has come. So now the parties have a couple of different options. As a purchaser, I can close on this property, purchase the property, and assume the tenants, which could be a different set of problems. Now I have to try to get this tenant out of the property. The second option would be to extend the closing date to a mutually agreed upon time to allow the proper notices and the proper landlord-tenant board processes to play out to get the tenants out of the property. And then the third, more or less common option is for the parties to walk away from the deal and say, look, we weren't able to provide vacant possession, which termed the agreement. So we take the deposit back, you take your property back, you deal with it, and so on and so forth. So these are the different options that kind of play out. And as you can see, can be very catastrophic if it's not dealt with prior.
Yeah, especially you're dealing with two families. And also for lawyers, kind of, you have to be on the edge as well, trying to resolve all these things, especially on the last day.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. We call that putting out fires
Yeah.
on the closing date.
I have a question from our buyer who says, what are the key things to look for in an agreement of purchase and sale?
Yes, this is a very important question because usually we find this is just kind of the common way that things are done. How things have evolved is that the lawyers don't really get involved in the agreements of purchase and sales until after they have been firmed up. So I know many lawyers and myself would like to get involved earlier on in the process if possible. So it is a good idea to have that reviewed by a lawyer. And I know you do a great job of doing that. You will run non-firm agreements by me so we can actually still do something. So things to look in there are definitely the dates. I would say that the dates are very key in agreements of purchase and sale, and they actually mean something. Whereas I find a lot with first-time home buyers, they may not appreciate the value of these dates and say, well, okay, the closing has to be on or around this date. The requisition date is on or around this date. But no, it's very clear in the agreement that time is of the essence. And what that means is that every date and time in the agreement has value here. And so be very wary and clear and understand the dates that you are putting in the agreement and know that you need to be in a position to close by that date. Other things to look at is definitely for conditions, especially for a buyer. If you're buying a property and your conditions are not clearly set out, then what you're entering into is a firm agreement, and you may not be able to, for example, secure financing. Or you may want to get a home inspection done on that property to see what you're walking into in terms of any issues. So if you don't have those conditions clearly stipulated, then you're not going to be able to get those things checked out. And other things are like ensuring the property address and the names of the parties are spelled correctly. Again, sometimes people don't see the value in that, but especially when you're buying and you need to get a mortgage, I've seen mortgage deals get delayed because of little issues like this, where the names were spelled in.
I have a question from a buyer who says, how can I protect my deposit if a deal?
Yes, so that's another, yes. Yes, protecting your deposit is very important. You know, these deposits are sometimes these people's hard-earned money that they brought, sometimes from overseas, and they're trying to start a life in Canada and they're buying a home, and now they put, let's say, $100,000 deposit on a property. And now, let's say, for whatever reason, you were not able to get a mortgage, for example, to close that property. And now you have to do the very difficult thing of backing out of that property. There are several ways that you can do to protect your deposit. What it boils down to is working with the other side, working with the other lawyer and the sellers to come to some type of agreement to either get that full deposit back, or if not full, at least some or part of it. And that's one of the services that we offer. We can negotiate back and forth with that seller to try to get some of that deposit back. Understanding that our leverage sometimes is not the greatest in those situations.
Yeah.
But those are some ways that a deposit can be protected in a difficult situation.
Yeah, especially for first-time buyer who's most likely like a life savings for them. So they have gathered all that money over the years to go purchase their dream home, and then all of a sudden you have these situations come up.
Yes, and just as a follow-up, yes, that's a great point. The follow-up to that is on pre-construction homes.
Yeah.
So sometimes these people have put these deposits way back.
Yeah.
3-4 years ago, and now as these closings are coming up,
yeah,
and some of these properties have just not maintained the value
yeah,
that
is not coming out.
Yes, especially in the condo market.
Yeah.
So what we're finding is now these deposits that these people put are in jeopardy, and they're very worried about, okay, what's going to happen to my money? I can't close. Will I get any money back? So that's another service we offer, where we deal with builders on behalf of purchasers and try our best to try to get money back from the builders if the purchasers can't close, or we try to find alternative ways that we can perhaps get to the finish line alternate financing, private mortgages, something like that to try to close it.
Which usually takes time.
Exactly. Yeah. Just so they don't lose their deposit.
Yeah. So I have a question about pre-construction here, which says, what are the common pitfalls to avoid when buying a pre-construction condo in Ontario?
Okay, yes. So pre-construction properties, whether freehold, townhomes, POTL, townhomes, or just regular condos, are a different animal altogether. On the pre-construction condo side, the main thing to be aware of is that there are two closings. People are usually surprised when they find out about this. Why do I have to close twice? So on the pre-construction side, there's an interim closing. So be aware that you will have to take possession of this condo, pay the builder $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 per month, basically as a tenant, and get the keys to this condo. Now, this period can last 2 months, 6 months, up to 8 months, 9 months. I've seen it last. So be prepared to budget to carry that property. Now, of course, you'll be able to rent out the property during this time. However, as you're finding right now, the rental market is just not really has caught up with the amount of these monthly payments that the builders are charging.
Yeah.
So that's a huge pitfall. Another pitfall to look out for is these builder adjustments and additional charges, levies, fees that are not necessarily spelled out very clearly. Sometimes not at all. They just say to be determined. So these charges can add up to anywhere between $20, $40, and I've seen, up to $50,000 in some cases more for these levies. So it's very important to have those capped by your lawyer. And if not capped, at least have an idea of how much you're in.
And in a lot of cases, the buyers are not prepared if they have no idea.
That's right. Essentially, it wipes out the whole deposit.
Yeah. I have a question. This might come up, often. Like, how can I ensure a smooth transition of utilities at closing?
Yes, this is a very good question because it's a minor point, but it can end up being a huge headache, especially for buyers, first-time home buyers, or even if you're selling and then moving somewhere else, maybe to a different jurisdiction. So there used to be a time, I think this is where confusion comes. There used to be a time where the lawyers would be responsible or at least be able to assist with this process. Since these new privacy information kind of laws have been implemented, I would say over the last maybe 10 to 15 years, we are, as lawyers, not really able to assist with that process because there's a lot of personal information that these companies collect and they want it directly from the
consumer.
So, but it can be a pitfall because you can find that a month or two might go by, and if you never actually contacted them to set up your account, then you might not get a bill or you might get a late bill, and then you might have to pay some additional charges or interest, which no one likes to do, right? So our process is to notify the purchasers or the sellers that, look, you need to contact such and such company, usually Enbridge or Electra, or depending on which jurisdiction you are, those 2 or 3 companies, just let them know that you're moving. And then they have a pretty good process of gathering the information and then sending final bills out.
Because most of the time buyers are confused. What should I be? Who's doing it? And sometimes it happens, like when the closing happens, they haven't really actually moved that.
That's right.
The utilities, right?
That's right. Yes.
So I have a question which is very typical. It's a typical and it's often asked, what are the closing costs in Ontario and usually who pays for them?
Yes, this is a question that I get often, and usually the first question is, how much are your fees, Nabil? So, and of course, when you're buying a home or selling a home, it's a huge transaction, and I find most of our clients are very particular and they know or they want to know exactly how much either they need to bring to the table or they're going to be walking away. And I like that. I like when people are involved in the process and they know what's going on. So when you're buying a home in Ontario, here are the things that you should budget for. The number one and the biggest cost is Ontario land transfer tax. And that could be more depending on where you buy. If you're buying in Toronto, it's basically top. Okay. So that's a huge one. That essentially works out to, if you wanted a rough number, 1.5%, depending on the amount of the price. But for the properties that are basically being sold, you're looking at that amount. So that obviously can be very significant. You're trying to $40,000 on average homes. So, and that's a huge cost. And interestingly enough, this tax isn't in other provinces. But it's a different topic for a different day.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is the title insurance, which is a much less relative cost. Usually anywhere, depending on the type of property and the size of the property, anywhere from $500 to $2,000, say, for buying a detached home, the big mortgage. So the title insurance policy covers you as a homeowner and also your bank for getting a mortgage. Okay, so the bank is also going to want a title insurance policy purchased on their behalf by you, covering them for things like mortgage fraud and so on and so forth. So that's the second cost. And then the third cost is the legal fees, which is our fees as lawyers. We're going in and doing title searching and corresponding with the other lawyer, preparing the documentation and getting ready for closing date and registering the title. So these are the three costs that you should be budgeting for in your real estate.
Since you've been working quite long in this field, like, how do you see the title fraud often, or like it used to be like in 5-6 years back? I think that there used to be a lot in the news about this happening, especially for paid off homes.
Yes.
Do you still see any?
So we're not seeing it as much. What we found is during COVID, after COVID, it did go up significantly. So there was a spike in the amount of mortgage fraud and title fraud that was happening. So there's two types of different frauds actually, or there's more than two, but the two main ones are either mortgage fraud, where somebody is going and taking out equity from your home by pretending to be you and taking that money and basically running away. So for example, let's say you worked your whole life to pay off your mortgages. Now your house is mortgage free. It's worth $2 million in the GTA. You go away to vacation to Florida. You come back 3 months later and you have some mortgage bills in the mail saying that your mortgage payments are outstanding. You missed 2 mortgage payments. So you do some research and you find that somebody actually did some fraud. They were able to make your driver's license and your ID and so on and so forth and take a mortgage out. Okay, so that's one type of fraud. And the other one is title fraud, as you mentioned first. So that's where actually someone goes in and actually changes the title. And so now you were the owner, but now you're no longer the owner. And that can be problematic because if that fraudulent owner then goes and sells that property to another third party for value, and that other third party does not know about the fraudulent transaction, that transfer is now valid.
Yeah.
So now you've lost your home and now you can't even get it back because the fraudster sold it to someone else. So in that case, you pretty much only have money as compensation. You get some type of insurance money, but your house is gone. So these are the different types of frauds that are current, and it's not as common anymore, but this is how it works. When the fraudsters see that people are letting their guards down and they're like, oh, it's not as prevalent, that's when it kicks up. So I would say it's always there and it never goes away, but the frequency goes.
So how can a consumer person, I would say like maybe the seniors are being targeted for this kind of thing?
Yeah.
So they're not aware, or how can a person like homeowner protect themselves?
Yes. So for homeowners protecting themselves, it's very important. You never have to do this before, but now you have to regularly, maybe once a year, check your title, contact your lawyer. It only costs about $30 or $40. We can pull a parcel register and just make sure that you are still the owner of your property.
Yeah.
And there's no other mortgages on the property. Okay? So that's one way they can do. But essentially, the Law Society has come in and taken some pretty drastic measures to stop this from happening. So I'm not sure if you've had to deal with this yet, but there is a mandatory third-party ID verification system now. So we can use any one of these third parties to then take your IDs, run them through their system, which is basically connected to the banking system. So it's pretty robust. And if that ID checks out, we're good. If not, then we can't proceed with the transaction. So these are some steps that the Law Society has come in to help consumers tackle frauds.
So another question is about a condo purchase. A buyer, well, what's the status certificate and why is it important for condo purchase?
Yes, the status certificate. So when you're purchasing a condominium or a unit, rather, in a condominium, it's different than purchasing a freehold home. You're basically purchasing a unit that's located within a corporation, more appropriately a condominium corporation. Okay. So this condominium corporation is established to govern, control, manage the day-to-day operations of this condominium, okay, whether it be high-rise or low-rise. Now, as a corporation, they have an obligation to, from time to time, submit reports, and these reports are then used as the basis to create status certificate. So it's very important that you review the status certificate of the condominium corporation that you are entering into this relationship with, because it'll show you, for example, how do they manage their money? What is their budget like? What's their reserve fund like? Have they thought about repairs? Do they have an emergency fund if something comes up? Right? So we can see these things in the status certificate. Also, it shows any legal issues. So if there are any legal cases that are pending against this corporation, we can take a look at that. And if there's any special assessments against the unit, so that's a big one, because if there is any money owing, that will be transferred to the purchaser. And that purchaser is not going to be responsible for paying that, even though it was nothing to do with that. These are the main reasons why we've said.
Is there like a standard for high-rise to have certain amount of reserve funds, or?
There's not a standard. I would say that every corporation is different. So it would depend on the amenities they have, the state, and the state of building, how old is the building. So all these things would factor into whether they need more or less money. But rather than the amount of money, it's more important to look at the way that they're budgeting and whether that budget makes sense.
So does like a low reserve fund translate to a trouble sign?
Yes, exactly. If it's alarmingly low, let's say anything less than $100,000, even anything a little bit more than that is problematic. But yes, anything less than that, that could mean that they're basically going to start looking to probably increase, yes, the amount that they're collecting from the unit owners to get that budget increased. But not always necessarily. Sometimes they do budget it in a way where it gets down and then it goes up and goes down. So we have to review it to see what's the situation.
So the POT is not related to this, but that fee, like how do you ascertain that?
Yes, that's a great question. So you talked about the POTL condos, right?
Yeah.
Parcel of tied land. So what these sneaky builders have done is that they found a way to construct these townhomes that are not freehold, but they're townhouse condominium.
Pretty much, yeah.
Right? Even though it's just a townhouse. So they're able to slap on a fee. So every month they're going to charge you like $150 or maybe $100. And it doesn't really cover much. It covers some snow removal, which are garbage. So I think the city would already do if they weren't. And garbage removal, yes, and some lawn maintenance. But what ends up happening is that does become then a condominium corporation. So you still have to get the status certificate. You still have to review it. The issues are less common because you have your townhome. There it is. The common elements are not really that.
A lot of new builds, because they're trying to make more money out of that, they are having the POT. So
that's it. I think, respectfully, it's a bit of a money grab.
Yeah, and there's not much the buyers can do. They're
no,
cheaper.
If you want in that project,
yeah,
you want that home in that area, this is the way you have to do.
Something related to that. Like, what are the key differences between freehold and condominium properties?
Oh, yes. So this is what we just discussed about. So a freehold, there is no condominium corporation. There's no one to pay money to. It's literally and freehold. You're freely holding this property. And a condominium, you still own the property. You can still sell it and so on and so forth. But there are rules and regulations and restrictions that would not be freehold.
Thank you so much for watching. And a huge thank you to Nabil Nakvi for sharing all that amazing advice. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up or subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss out or more tips like these. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, happy house hunting.